Hey everybody, Roy Rogers from the White Book and Second Sons here, back again with another one of these how and the why of it videos. It's been a little while, if you're watching this in real time, since I've done one of these videos because I was busy prepping for Gen Con. All of my non-podcasting Thrones free time was directed towards trying to do as best I could for myself and my teammates at Gen Con, and we had a very successful, my team, which called itself the Long Lances, had a very successful event this year. I was in the top 16. My teammate Jesse Carpenter was in the top 8, narrowly losing a game that would have brought him into the top 4, and I personally believe have won him the whole event. But sadly, Jesse lost that game, and we were knocked out. And my teammate Scott Levine won the melee. So we are really happy with how our team did. I'm really happy, more or less, with my own performance at Gen Con. So that's over. And so that means that I have more time to devote to things like making the how and the why of the videos, which I enjoy a lot. Today's video relates to what I was talking about earlier and is in many ways a sequel to my earlier video about how to start off as a competitive player, because I'm going to talk today all about teams, what they are, why I believe you should build one for yourself and to improve your own play, and sort of tell you a few stories from my 4 years of building and playing on a team at high-level competitive Thrones. So since I have started playing competitive Thrones since 2014, I have played at a team, with a team that has sort of waxed and waned with a core membership. This kind of Aaron Glazer, Jonathan Andrews / Darknaj, and Dan Struhall, and the sort of team has expanded and contracted based on that. We had 11 people play in the Joust this year, which was one of our larger showings, and it was really fun. And so we'll get to that. So, but before I can sort of jump into sort of the nitty-gritty of why I believe building as a team is really the best approach to high-level Thrones, and some of the benefits and some of the weaknesses, I need to define what do I mean when I say team. Okay, so team kind of is a synonym for it is kind of a build group, but when it comes to competitive, most people have a build group. It could be just a couple of people you play with at your store. It could be you, your best friend, and your spouse building decks together, all that kind of stuff. But a team kind of takes the approach of building decks as a group and sort of bouncing ideas off each other to the next level. It says, look, we're not just gonna. All right, Roy really wants to build the best Lanny Sun. No, that's a lie. Let's come up with a better deck for me. The best Tyrell Stag deck that he could possibly build. And he's going to bounce it off his friends and refine until I get a Tyrell Stag deck, and then I'm going to take it to a Store Championship, a regional, Gen Con, etc., and play. That's what a lot of build groups do. Very early on, that's kind of the approach that I took before I got very try-hardy with Thrones. But teams take it to the next level, because teams say, not do we just want to build the best deck for Roy or the best deck for Scott or the best deck for Aaron. We're going to try to break the meta. We're going to try to build the best deck or the best decks for a tournament, for a meta, for anything. So it could just be constantly, because recently my team's just been constantly building decks throughout the whole year with real intense periods around Worlds and Gen Con and Red Saturday, but that's kind of a little bit of a different thing for us. But anyway, that's a little too much into the nitty-gritty about how my team works. But anyway, so teams say we're going to break a meta, and they work together to come up with a deck or set of decks that is the best deck or the deck, and they then take that deck together as a group. There's a lot of room for growth in that, or a lot of room for differentiation among teams. Some teams are very loosely structured. Something like how Buzz described it on the episode of Second Son. So we talked a little bit about team play, which is with Team Sweden, which was very unstructured. There was a multitude of decks, a set of decks that, so this Swedish player really likes Rush. Well, there's another one they'll work and build together. And then there's people who really like mid-range, so they'll build. There's people who like control, they'll build together, and they'll come up with a set of decks that fit each player's playstyle. That's very unstructured, much closer to just a traditional build group, but still thinking about it as a group. And the people who settle on that control deck are playing the team's control deck, even if there's maybe 6 decks or 7 decks or more that the overall team comes up with. Particularly because, since as Buzz described it, there's a lot of people on Team Sweden, like 30 or something. Or you could go to the highly structured approach, like the classic villains of the Thrones community of the DC meta, headed by Corey and Seth, and earlier in the night, Eric Botslav. Or the Brotherhood, which was also a highly structured team that got Joe Morando his card design. I don't believe Joe, and I think Joe would agree with me, that he would have gotten his card design without Keith and James and all the rest of the Brotherhood guys building and testing and coming with their Lanny Wolf deck to Worlds. So, and DC, of course, was the apex of this, and these teams can be highly structured, where there's even a hierarchy, like these players are on the top, and everything trickles down from them, or they can just be more like first among equals kind of approach. But they're more highly structured teams. My team, the Long Lances, is much closer to the highly structured, but we do not have a hierarchy. There's no like Dark Naj is the king. We've got to do everything that John says. It's much closer to a democracy, but we are structured. We do bring a deck or 2 decks to a tournament. We're not sort of trying to necessarily customize decks to fit people. It's more like, look, we're going to try to break this meta. We're breaking the Gen Con meta. What do we think is going to be there? What beats that? And if we don't know what beats what's going to be there, what's the best deck that's going to be there? We'll bring that. So that's sort of the approach I'm mostly going to be talking about here, because I do believe it is the strongest team approach, which is adding a little bit more structure, adding a bit more structure and a bit more organization to the way in which you go about building. Because one of the things that's great about teams is they add systems. They say, look, we're going to do things X, Y, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to prepare for a tournament. So now that I've laid out at least a little bit, I hope that you were able to follow along, of sort of what a team is, I can lay out why I think having a team is so strong. And I have 4 reasons here that should just appear on the screen right here. 4 reasons you should build a team. The first is varied point of views. So if your team is 8 people, let's say it's 8 people, and you know what? I will put down here. This is my team, the Long Lances. Right down here, the people I built with this year, they're down there. That's Matt Gaiman, Scott Levine, Dark Naj right there on the far right, refusing to wear his team shirt. We got Schoenthal, Matt, Sean Emberley, Matt Clemens, Sean McCollum, Aaron Glazer, Sandy, myself. These are sort of the core people we brought to Gen Con. We had a few other people helping out who couldn't come to Gen Con. So this is our team, right? There was 11 people of us there. And we had 11 point of views. And that's actually really valuable, because one of the problems that you run into, and I definitely ran into when I was coming up in competitive Thrones, is that I had like a way of thinking about the game. I tended to like rush strategies or mid-range strategies, and I didn't necessarily think very deeply about other ways of going about it. But testing with my team broadened my ideas about what the game is. If your particular play style is out of the meta, which for me, my particular play style was like out of the meta for a good long period of time, in second edition, particularly like more passive defensive strategies that I've really come to love in second edition for a while were very out of the meta. Having your team to be like, look, just because you like the wall's not good right now. Here's some other ways to approach it. Here's some other ways of coming about it. And you can get a lot of various debate going about, what's the best deck, what's the worst deck, and here's some approaches. So even though if your particular style of deck building is out, your particular play style is out of the meta, it's not working, you'll still be able to get the insights of what is working, because at least one person on your team is going to have a sense, because like every single one of the players on my team is very different. Like I'm a passive power guy. Jesse is like the king of jank. Dark Knight is one of the best rush and aggro builders and players who's ever played the game. Aaron and Scott are amazing control players, and that's just an example of just a few of the people. And those are the people, of course, I've been building with the longest, that I sort of rattled off there. But like everybody, and like Sean McCollum is just a great he finds really interesting twists on pre-existing decks, and like Matt and Sean Emberley are grinder. Both Matts and Sean Emberley are grinders and have a sort of point of view of people who can just sort of play a lot of games all the time. So we each have a different approach, and we each bring it. And that means that we're going to be much more ready for a meta than just someone who sits and plays on Iron Throne all the time. And I'll get to Iron Throne and its role in testing and why I think building as a team is better than just grinding games in Iron Throne. That's my point number 3, where it says 3, where it says data. But so you get a variety of different points of view. Okay. The second reason why you should build as a team is mentorship. So I had the great advantage of coming in and I had no card experience. I played Magic the Gathering and L5R and a little bit of Pokemon when I was in middle school and early high school. And the Star Wars CCG, never competitively, really. I think I went to one L5R tournament when I was in like the 8th grade. But just a lot of kitchen table card gaming when I was younger. But I just kind of just fell backwards into Game of Thrones, the LCG, as an adult, and had no competitive card game experience and no real sort of oomph in sort of coming into card games blind. Joining up on a team with Aaron and Dan Struhall and Dark Naj and the Ottawa boys sort of mentored me up, particularly Dan and Aaron and John. They taught me how to play. They taught me how to think about the game. They expanded my way of thinking about it. They taught me a lot of card game basics, a lot of play basics. They would just run games with me to teach me things. And it was just amazing because that sort of raised my play from sort of lower tier, firmly mediocre to I think I'm improved a lot over the last 4 years. I wouldn't say that I'm one of the best players in the country, but I've definitely improved a lot. And all of that goes to the credit of the mentorship that my teammates gave me. So that's a huge argument. If I was just sitting there building with myself, I would still just be playing a bunch of crappy Stark decks and a bunch of crappy wall decks without their help. And that's hugely important and one of the reasons why I'm a team, because the team gives you this opportunity to work closely with people and build your own skill. Now, the question you're probably thinking, well, Roy, I'm really interested in building as a team, but there's nobody in my build area or nobody that I know that is as good as a Dark Notch, as good as an Aaron Glazer. Well, that's fine too, because you can mentor each other. So you can make a conscious effort, even if you are new players, mediocre players, median, what I like to call median Thrones players, so the average player. You just work together and consciously try to improve your play. And a great way to do that is through games that playing as many games as possible, not necessarily to conclusion, and not trying to beat each other. So one of the problems you can run into, and I definitely ran into when it was like when I was first beginning, was I would play test games, and the goal fundamentally was for me, like I was playing a tournament game or a kitchen table game of like beating up on my opponent. But that's not really what testing's about. It's about data. It's about getting as many games as possible. So when it looks like I could lose, even if there's like a 10% chance, 20% chance I could get out of it, there's only a 20% chance I should win. We should probably scoop that game up and play another one, even though there's a chance I could win. Or if I'm winning and I know I'm going to win, I can turn to my testing partner and be like, look, I'm going to win this game. I've got 2 superior claims and a Lady Sansa's Rose. You're going to lose. We should move on to the next game. And you can just do that together, even if you don't have a Dark Notch to sort of teach you a lot about how card games work. Even if you don't have an Aaron Glazer to teach you a lot about how deck building works. You can work together to consciously improve your play. Not just play a bunch of games, but also be like, what's working in this matchup, what's not working in this matchup, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong? And that means, of course, going to resources like listening to episodes of White Book, going to videos online, both about Thrones, but also about broader card games. Like Magic resources are super useful for Game of Thrones players when they talk about general card game mechanics, right? Well, they won't, the stack doesn't exist in Game of Thrones, but things like card advantage, making sure your mental game is on point, all those kind of resources that really popular card games like Hearthstone and Magic have can really help upgrade your Thrones play, and you can do that together with your teammates, right? And making sure that you are, because, and we'll get to sort of the reducing variance part, which is related to this, but the team spirit thing encourages you, right? Because if you are helping your teammate get better, you're also helping yourself get better because you guys are playing as a team. You are viewing this as a team effort. So again, mentorship is crucial, and it doesn't just have to be you're building with these amazing people and they're going to teach you how the game works. I mean, you might get lucky like I did and have that happen, but it might not, particularly these days as, a lot of the more senior level players have their own way of doing things. You're going to have to find your own path, and that means helping yourself as a newer or aspiring, excuse me, player to sort of build up your own group. And it's going to have to take a conscious effort. This is all work, but it's hugely amazing because that mentorship not only does it improve your Thrones experience, but that sort of mentor-mentee relationship, even if it's not as like stark differentiation in terms of level of skill, it builds closer friendships. Like working together with these guys, like Aaron is one of my best friends I made as an adult. Same with Dark Naj, same with Scott, same with a variety of these people that I've been building with Dan Struhall for a long time. So it's not only does it make you better at Thrones, but it brings you closer together as people. And one of the reasons why we play this game isn't just for pieces of plastic and metal, but is for the community connections. And so this helps foster it within your team. 3, data. Okay, so as my students would say, real rap here. Iron Throne data is terrible. Let's just be honest here. Iron Throne has a lot of new players who don't necessarily know how their deck works. It has a lot of people testing jank. It has a lot of people casually playing the game. It's not going to give you reliable data. I mean, this is something I learned pretty quickly when Iron Throne became the dominant way. There's lots of things that are benefits about Iron Throne, particularly over Octagon, which I hate Octagon so much. I just lost all the 1.0 players who were watching this, but I hate Octagon. I hated it in 1.0. I hated it in 2.0. I'm glad we're on Thrones DB. Or, excuse me, not Thrones DB, Iron Throne. Iron Throne data is not very useful. There's just like a lot of things, like things that go wrong. You have people like Aaron Glazer who will just do trigger. He's like, oh, I missed this, so I'm going to take all this back, blah, 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 blah. And you're just like, whatever, Aaron. What's going on here? Most Iron Throne data is kind of crappy. What Iron Throne data can give you, though, is like a sense of like how your deck plays and what the interactions are. So when I'm testing with Iron Throne, I'm less concerned, although I do enjoy winning Iron Throne games. I'm more interested in sort of like how my deck interacts with itself, and sort of like what are the key plots, what are the key interactions, what are the key draws, and all these kind of things. Now sometimes I stumble into an opponent who's running a meta deck, and that could be very useful data, but that doesn't always the case. You sometimes have these people testing this like Nice White Alliance Rose Lion deck. I don't know. I've seen lots of weird stuff. It was a Stark Lion Watch deck. Right. It was very weird. Anyway, running things like that, and you're just like, okay, this is not going to be useful data for me in testing, but I can still use the game to get a sense of what my interactions are. The nice thing about building as a team is it cuts all of that noise out, and you know that you are going to get good data testing with your team. And your team, you can decide, of course, not just what randos on Iron Throne are playing. You can set, we're going to play the Lanny matchup, we're going to play the Tyrell matchup, we're going to play blah, 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 all the different factions, all the current decks. And you'll be able to say, okay, today we're testing Tyrell. Play a lot of Tyrell games. Today we're testing Martell. Play a lot of Martell games. Today we're testing Barra, etc., etc., etc. You're going to get good data. All right? And you're getting reps in, and you're getting a sense of how your deck is. So that's another great reason to build as a team. You can, generally speaking, trust the data that you get because you know who the players are, you know what they're doing, they're playing decks that you think are of value and not necessarily just random jank of the moment that's on Iron Throne. You're going to get really good data, and you're going to be able to draw conclusions from that. So again, I think actually in many ways, particularly for people who are sort of comfortable in their level of play and are playing with people that they think are roughly of the same skill level, data, this is the most important one because you're going to be able to get reliable data to make decisions, and you can't always get reliable data to make decisions. Like I played on Thrones CB and been like, oh man, what was it? Oh yeah, HRD White Tree deck is amazing. It's kicking butt on Iron Throne. It's awesome. And my teammates were kind of like, Roy, this deck's not very good. But I was like, it's doing so well on Iron Throne. And I brought it to a Store Championship and lost every single game, including against its good matchups. Womp womp. And that was simply because it was a Store Championship season, we weren't really doing hardcore building together, and we were building decks separately. And, well, that's how you tank your Jousting Pavilion rating, okay? And anyway, so Iron Throne data, not reliable, but data from your teammates is. And you know where it came from. You can track its sort of origins. And you can also, since you're on a team, like if you feel like, okay, I actually think that this matchup should be positive, how is it being played? And ask questions about the games and find out, oh, okay, Johnny was making the wrong, was playing these plots wrong. Maybe if you do it this way, it will improve. And if sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't, and it just means that you were wrong about your sense of the matchup. And then the final one, and probably the most controversial thing about team play is at the tournament itself. It reduces variance. Okay, Game of Thrones, the card game, is a very high variance competitive card game. We only do best out of 1, not best out of 3. So that means if your deck shits on itself, for example, like mine did in the top 8 at Gen Con this year, there's no coming back from that. There's no match 2. There's no match 3. You are out. Or you're knocked out of the cut. Or you lose your win in game. There's the margin for error, particularly on the variance of your draw variance in Game of Thrones, is brutal and unforgiving. And once you start going to enough tournaments, you come to realize that pretty quick. A few bad draws can knock you out of a tournament very fast. The nice thing about playing as a team is this reduces that. So you can build an awesome deck. Like, it's the best deck in the world. And you show up by yourself, and your first 2 matchups are just... So say it's strong against 7 out of the 8 factions. And you're like, oh, this is great. I got it. I can't win the Bear matchup, but all the other factions, I got this. Well, your first round opponent is Bear. Crap. You lose. Your second round opponent is Barra. You lose. Well, your chances of making the cut are close to nil. And you're in trouble. But if you were playing this as a team where all of you brought this deck, not everyone's going to play Barra, and they're going to advance. And, just because, and now you might draw the short end of the stick. I drew that at the 2017 Gen Con, right? No, 2016 Gen Con, excuse me, the Lanny Sun year, which I'll talk more about later. I did the worst, I think, of everybody in our team with my 50-50 record. And then sometimes you draw the upper hand of the variance, for example, like I did this past year and going to top 16. And Porker Schoenthal drew the lower end of the variance. Like, it just happens, but it reduces it because in the sense that, okay, I'm eliminated. Let's go back to my example of this, let's say, Targaryen deck that beats everything but Baratheon. All right, I'm out. I went 2-3 in the tournament. I'm out. Okay, but my teammates aren't. Say 3 of my teammates made it through. I can now cheer for them. And the deck that I helped build, the deck that I put my blood and sweat, is still live. It could still win the tournament. And that's a huge reason, particularly when you spend all the... Look, you can't finish in the money in Game of Thrones, right? If you're going to spend all this money, there's the social experience. And this ups the social experience. It says, like, look, I'm out. Instead of drinking my sorrows away, I can go there and cheer for Johnny. I can go and cheer for Scott. I can go cheer for Aaron. I can cheer for Darknosh. I can cheer for all these my teammates, and that gives me a reason to stay at the tournament. That gives me a reason to continue to be excited and do those kind of things. And that's like such a huge thing, and it makes it much more enjoyable. Tournaments that I have gone to with my teammates, both big ones and small ones, have been infinitely more fun than times when I've gone by myself. As much as the social experience might be great, it's still, the tournament itself is not as fun because sometimes you just do poorly, and not necessarily through misplays, but through bad matchups or bad draw variants. And while it impacts you, the rest of your team can be rising, and it pays all that hard work you put into preparing pays off twice. So again, when I say reducing variance, that's what I mean. I mean that there's going to be more success, unless you truly screw up your meta read, which does happen. For example, our team in 2016, I think, made a pretty big mistake with the way we approached it, and I'll talk a little bit about that actually in a minute. And we can really reduce variance, though, by having multiple people playing the same deck or decks, right? So you can say, all right, I crapped out of this tournament, but the Tyrell deck I helped build placed a person in the top 8, or the winner, right? And it also creates like these amazing experiences of like the best Thrones memory that I have, besides the one time the one I won wins a winner, was when Scott won Stormy of Starpike, or Aaron won Red Saturday, or when Jesse's in the top 4, top 8 of tournaments, right? Like, besides my own success, I can really, it's almost as close to that as possible is when my teammates do really well. And that's like such a huge thing. Now, not everybody likes that feeling or chases that feeling. Like, it doesn't work for them, but for me it does. And that's one of the reasons why I love building as a team, is this number 4, this reducing variance / the way in which team works. All right, so these are the four reasons. There are others that you can ask in the comments, but these are sort of 4 basic reasons. And so what about, let's take off the team photo, and let's say what are some problems. So There are two big problems to building as a team. The first is tunnel vision. Okay, this is particularly a big problem for teams that have been doing it for a while, or teams that have really one or two really strong personalities. And it's sort of the drawback of point number one, which is very POVs. Because sometimes your PV point of view can homogenize. It can become very too similar. You've been doing all this testing, and you come to approach a meta or the game itself in a very specific direction. Excuse me. And that leads to tunnel vision, and you miss important things. And that can just lead you to blowing your own feet off and really undermining the whole point of building as a team. It reduces, it makes your data not as good. It does not reduce variance. Mentorship is fine, but it takes away the point of a varied POV where you start getting this tunnel vision approach. Now, let me provide you a concrete example, and this is very controversial in our build group. We still talk about it. Literally, we still argue about this in our group chats. Is Gen Con 2016 the first Gen Con, the year Chris Schoenthal won, who was not part of our team at that time. Anyway, we brought, by we I mean Dan Struhall, John, Darknaj, Aaron, myself, the Ottawa boys of Sean Eberly and Matt. And then we had Boston was building with us that year as well. But Boston brought Lanny Wolf. But we brought Lanny's son. The people I listed off there brought Lanny's son. And we brought Lanny's son because so the whole year we had been, well, not the whole year, but the whole 6 months after Dance of Dragons of that year when Patrick Haynes, Patrick was building with us too. Patrick was in our group then before he quit to be young and exciting. He won with one of our team decks of Lanny Dragon, and Lanny Dragon started to take over the meta after Dance of Dragons 1. So after Dance of Dragons 1, we sort of tested that deck a lot, and we're like, this deck is really good. In fact, it's pretty close to busted. The only thing that kind of is close to it is Stark Fealty that Nate Tarantelli had won U.S. Nationals with, and we tested that deck a lot. We're like, this deck is also really good, but the Lanny Dragon matchup isn't all that great. So we tried to sort of break the meta, and we tested a lot of things. We tested Tark, we tested Martell, we tested Greyjoy, we tested all these things, and we came up with this meta breaker of Lanny Sun, which had a very positive matchup against Lanny Dragon, and had a pretty good Stark Fealty matchup, but it just wasn't as consistent as Lanny Dragon or Stark Fealty. Even though it generally did beat Lanny Dragon, it was just a much higher variance. You're running much crappier cards than the Lanny Dragon deck was. Like, much, much crappier. Like, those one-drop attachments, they're fine, but they're, like, not as good as, like, Miri. Did it have the stand location? I can't remember if it had the stand location, if that was out yet. I don't think it was. But anyway, a lot, like, it just, like, the Lanny, like, and really efficient 2-drops like Jorah, and just, like, just Lanny Dragon at that time was, like, very streamlined. The deck itself was, like, had been, like, we kicked it off at Dance of Dragons that year, but other people have been building it as well, and then it just got refined throughout the regional season, throughout the Star Championship season. I mean, like, you had a Canadian Nationals that had a Lanny Dragon mirror match. Like, it was that point of, like, it was the meta deck, the tyrannical creature. So we were like, okay, Lanny's Sun does beat it. It did, like, taking away Miri's icons, eat shit, right? But the deck was just not as consistent, and we came very close to just being like, look, we should just bring Lanny Dragon. But we wanted to beat the meta, and that was like what we had spent these months doing, was trying to beat the meta, not join the meta, beat the meta. And this did not work out for us. Only one, Aaron got eliminated in the graduated. No, only Aaron and John made the graduated cut. Aaron was eliminated in the graduated cut. He lost like the same guy in the Swiss and in the graduated cut. It was pretty brutal. And then Darknaj lost in the top 8. And we were just all really disappointed because I think we had a very big group that year. I think even if you include Boston, much bigger than our group this past year. I think we had like 12 or 13 people, and we only placed 2. Compare that result to this past year, where we placed 7 out of 11. So it was very bad, very very bad year for us. And it was tunnel vision. It was just simply we became obsessed with the idea of beating the meta when the answer to the meta was simply to just join it, to just all of us play Landy Dragon. Yeah, Roy hates Landy Dragon, but look, it's all about winning Gen Con, not about what I want necessarily. So that was a huge mistake. Now, Aaron says that it wasn't. Dark Naj and I and Dan all think it was, but say la vie. It's the past. But that's the kind of thing that happens when you get into, which is you get people who approach the game. They've been testing for so long. This is a big problem with our group sometimes, where like you start metaing for your meta. So like we are all on. Let's pick a card. We're on political disaster. Let's say that's it, right? And like we have political disaster in all our other decks, and be like, oh man, this Martell deck just loses the political disaster because we know the political disaster is good, and you sometimes forget that yeah, okay, your team might be on political disaster, but everybody else might not be. So that means that decks that lose to your deck can still be good, and it just can get all turned up if you don't make a conscious effort to avoid this tunnel vision of metaing your meta, and particularly when you have really good players, sometimes they'll be like, oh, everyone plays like John plays, or everyone plays like Aaron plays. But that's not necessarily the way the broader meta is, and you always got to try to keep your team focused not just on your internal community, but on the broader community through following things at ThrowSDB, following things on Team Pavilion, stuff like that. So that's problem number one, tunnel vision. The other problem is problem number two, staying humble, being open to other people's ideas. So this is definitely something that can happen with teams. People get pet decks, or deck marriage, as Dark Knight calls it in his classic article about deck marriage, where people just like fall in love with a deck. It could be Stark Fealty, it could be a wall deck, it could be anything. And they love it. They put all this data in. They're like, blah, 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 blah. This is amazing. Everybody else in the group plays it, and they're like, no, dude, this deck is not very good. And you have to be willing to say, okay. Like when that happens, like you could have a 90% win rate with this deck, but the 7 other people on your team have a 10% win rate. Something is going wrong here. Either the 7 other people on your team suck, or you've become married to this deck. Or you're trusting Iron Throne data, like playing randos on Iron Throne over the data that your own team is presenting to you. These are all problems that you can run into and be like, look, I think that Martell Wolf is the best deck. I think that Stark Fealty is the best deck, and just start yelling at each other about things because you have a particular playstyle that you think is the best, and emotions can run very high, particularly when you're testing for big events like Gen Con for Worlds, and people just won't necessarily be open to other people's ideas. And staying humble and being able to say, like, look, here's my data, here's what I'm presenting to you, here are the other ideas from the team, it's easier said than done. Like, people are stubborn. People can really just not be as open as they should be, and that's a big thing. And managing these kind of egos, and it doesn't just be I'm a former world champion level egos. It can simply be like I've only gone 4-2 at a turn. Like every tournament I've ever gone to, I've gone at least 4-2 or better. Kind of egos. Like it's just building. Card players, Thrones players have egos, and they have strong opinions, and balancing the need to hear everyone's strong opinions and take data away from it, but also not letting one person's strong opinion run over the varied POVs of the groups is a constant tension in team play. When you have a team that's like the old DC of like you have a Corey Faraday who's like a once in a generation like a card mind, it's easier to be like Corey's like, no, that's right, no, that's wrong, and was like, thanks, Corey. But when you have more of a democratic approach, that can run into some big problems. I mean, it's a classic democracy problem of debate. So that's sort of the other major thing, is sort of making sure that if you're building as a team, that you stay humble and you stay open to other people's ideas. So yeah, those are sort of 4 reasons why you should build as a team. 2 reasons why staying humble is important. I really do think more people should play as a team. It's just really fun. Like you have people to cheer for, and you have people cheering for you and supporting you, and that's like a really amazing experience. Now I know, like in the Game of Thrones community, and card game communities in general, but particularly in Game of Thrones, like people like being independent. They like be able to say like I did this on my own. That like independent streak. I'm not the kind of person that's super appealing to. Like, I love being able to say, like, ooh, I came up with this brilliant idea, yes. But, like, at the end of the day, that seldom happens, and I'm much more willing to work with someone to sort of find the best idea for us, right? And then has improved my game. Like I will always say, and to the day in which I stopped playing this game competitively, all of my success at this game is put to the mentorship and um, just the playtesting that I've done with my team. And I really do want more metas to take a more structured approach. So to sort of wrap up the whole point of this, what makes building a team and why I would suggest it to a variety of metas so important is it creates structure. It organizes data. It organizes ways for players to improve. It organizes ways of articulating your point of view. It reduces variance at tournaments. And it just makes the testing for big events a much better experience for everyone involved. I've built with a variety, like we have our core team that's become the Long Lances for 4 years. This is the fourth Gen Con that we've built as a team. One in 1.0 and three in 2.0. Every year we've at least placed someone in the top 32 day 2, and we've had really good success at other big events, and that's because of the team approach. And I think that the Game of Thrones community would be better as a competitive experience, particularly at large events like Worlds and Stolic and Gen Con, if they approached it building as a team. So that's the end of this video. And if you have any further questions about team building and things like that, please feel free to leave them down in the comments. I'm going to be starting this up again more regularly going forward. My next video, I was going to do 2 videos today to let you behind the scenes, but ThronesDB is down. So when ThronesDB comes back up, I plan on doing a Stark cohort video. If there's any other meta decks that you would like me to take a look at and do another How the Why video, please leave it in the comments here. I appreciate everybody watching this, and I hope you got something. I hope the next major event I go to, Worlds, that there will be more teams, and so we can have some real punch-out competition between the Long Lances and our friends and rivals out there in the world. So anyway, take care.